Damon Cross thought he ruled Liverpool's docks, untouchable and feared. But Arben Kodra had been watching, waiting and planning a ruthless revenge that would tear his empire apart. One city, two gangs, a war drenched in blood, betrayal and fear that no one would survive unscathed. Please subscribe and share for daily new update of gang crime story, and watch till end. Liverpool was alive with the hum of its usual chaos, the streets crowded with people, cars honking, and neon signs flickering in the cold winter night. On the surface, everything seemed ordinary, but the city's underworld was simmering with tension. The Liverpool Gang had long controlled the docks, warehouses, and backstreets, their influence stretching across the city like an invisible web. At the center of this empire stood Damon Cross, a man whose reputation for violence and cunning had kept rival gangs at bay for years. Damon was proud, arrogant even, believing that no one could ever challenge him, but pride often blinds, and this time, it was about to prove deadly. Far away, across Europe, a storm was quietly brewing. The Albanian Mafia, led by the cold and calculating Arben Kodra, had been watching the Liverpool Gang for months. Arben was not a man to act rashly. Every step was planned, every move calculated. The Albanians had been wronged in the past, victims of smuggling gone wrong, shipments stolen, and a few men humiliated. To them, this was not just business, it was a matter of honor, and honor demanded blood. Arben's network spanned continents, and Liverpool had become the perfect target for his revenge. Back in Liverpool, Damon was oblivious to the danger approaching. The gang was busy expanding its operations, seizing control of smaller rivals and smuggling contraband along the docks. Life was good, or so it seemed. Damon's men, including his most trusted lieutenants Levi Marconi and Troy Halstead, went about their daily routines, unaware that every shipment, every meeting, and every step outside could be their last. The city, which had always been a playground for the gang, was about to turn into a trap. The Albanians arrived quietly, slipping into the city unnoticed. Their presence was like a shadow stretching across Liverpool, unseen but felt. Arben had sent a few of his best men ahead to survey the docks, warehouses, and escape routes. They studied the Liverpool Gang's routines, noting when guards changed shifts, which streets were monitored, and where Damon kept his most valuable assets. Every observation was meticulously recorded. Every detail was a piece of a puzzle that, when completed, would bring destruction. One fateful night, the first act of the Albanians' revenge began. A small but strategic explosion rocked a warehouse on the docks. Flames erupted into the sky, lighting up the water with an eerie orange glow. The Liverpool Gang scrambled in confusion, the sound of sirens mixing with the roar of the fire. Damon, alerted by the chaos, arrived at the scene with his men, but it was already too late. Valuable shipments were destroyed, and several men were badly injured. Among them was Levi Marconi, who narrowly escaped with his life. The attack was precise, leaving no evidence behind, no fingerprints, no witnesses, no doubt. The message was clear. The Albanian Mafia had arrived in Liverpool, and they were not here to negotiate. Fear began to creep into the hearts of Damon's men. For the first time, the gang felt vulnerable. Across the city, whispers spread of the Albanians' arrival, of the ruthless men who would stop at nothing to claim revenge. And at the center of it all, Damon realized that the game had changed. The streets he once ruled were no longer his own, and the shadows over Liverpool were growing darker with each passing hour. The first strike came like a storm out of nowhere, silent yet devastating. The Albanian Mafia had been preparing for weeks, and every detail of their attack was calculated to perfection. It began on a night when Liverpool's streets were slick with rain, the pavement reflecting the dim glow of streetlights. The docks were nearly empty, the only movement the occasional cargo truck or lone security patrol. Damon Cross and his gang were confident in their territory, believing that no one could touch them on their own streets. But confidence, as they would soon learn, was the most dangerous weakness of all. The Albanian strike team moved like shadows, slipping past the city's limited security and scaling the warehouses that lined the waterfront. Each man carried with him a deadly purpose, and each knew their role with exact precision. No unnecessary risk, no hesitation, only cold, calculated revenge. At the center of the operation was Arben Kodra, observing from a distance, orchestrating every move like a maestro controlling a deadly symphony. His eyes were sharp, his patience immense. He had no intention of leaving Liverpool's gang alive to tell the tale. Suddenly the stillness was broken by an explosion. One of Damon's key warehouses erupted into flames, a ball of fire that sent thick black smoke twisting into the night sky. The sound rattled nearby buildings and echoed through the empty streets, alerting the gang to the danger too late. Damon and his men rushed toward the blaze, only to find chaos. Shipping crates lay scattered, some burning, others smashed. The fire consumed valuable contraband, the loss hitting the gang not just financially but strategically. Their operations had been compromised, and more importantly, the message was clear: this was only the beginning. Levi Marconi, one of Damon's most trusted lieutenants, barely made it out of the inferno. His clothes scorched, lungs burning from the smoke, he realized that the Albanians' assault was not random but meticulously planned. Every corner of the docks had been mapped, every guard routine studied. The Albanians knew exactly how to hit without giving the Liverpool gang a chance to retaliate. Panic began to ripple through the remaining gang members, an unfamiliar feeling that left even the toughest men unsettled. In the following hours, the Albanians continued to strike with surgical precision. Trucks carrying goods were intercepted and destroyed. Safe houses were vandalized, leaving messages written in blood on the walls, a haunting reminder of the Albanians' ruthlessness. Damon's confidence wavered as he realized that every move he thought was secret was being watched. He began to understand the full scope of Arben Kodra's network, international connections, loyal soldiers, and a plan that went far beyond Liverpool. The city itself seemed to tremble under the Albanians' shadow. Civilians whispered of masked men, explosions, and sudden disappearances, unsure of who was behind the attacks. Even Liverpool's Underworld started to question the invincibility of Damon Cross. The Liverpool gang, once untouchable on their own streets, now felt the grip of fear tightening around them. For Damon, the first strike was more than a loss of property or men. It was a clear signal that the Albanians were here to take everything, and their revenge would not stop until every piece of his empire was in ruins. Damon Cross realized the Albanians were no ordinary rivals. They did not strike and run. They watched, waited, and struck again with surgical precision. The city of Liverpool had become a chessboard, and every move Damon made seemed anticipated, countered before he could act. The Albanians were invisible predators, operating in silence. Cars vanished from parking lots, shipments disappeared without a trace, and men who had been loyal to Damon simply stopped answering their phones. The Liverpool gang felt the first true taste of fear. Damon tried to organize a response. He called meetings in hidden basements and reinforced warehouses, instructing his lieutenants to double their security. Levi Marconi and Troy Halstead patrolled the docks tirelessly, watching for any sign of the Albanians. But every step they took seemed to be predicted. Every alley they checked, every shipment they guarded. The Albanians had already been there first, leaving only evidence of destruction and intimidation. Damon realized with a sinking heart that this was not just a vendetta, it was a campaign of psychological warfare. The Albanians had a methodical way of sending messages. One morning, a shipment of electronics meant for the Liverpool gang arrived. Smashed. The boxes emptied and contents destroyed. On the crates, letters written in red ink spelled out warnings and symbols Damon did not recognize. A silent assertion of dominance. The Albanians were making it clear that they could reach Damon anywhere, at any time. Even the docks, which had always been his sanctuary, were no longer safe. Men who had once laughed at the idea of a rival gang invading their city now stared over their shoulders, watching shadows and questioning loyalties. Rumors began to circulate within the gang. Some whispered that there were traitors among them, feeding information to the Albanians. The paranoia was growing. Damon could not trust anyone completely, not even his closest allies. Every handshake, every nod, seemed suspect. The Albanians thrived on this fear, using it as a weapon to weaken the Liverpool Gang from the inside out. The city itself became part of the hunt, the Albanians blending into its nightlife, its streets, and its crowded neighborhoods. No alley was too small, no building too hidden. Their reach seemed limitless. Damon tried to counter the Albanians' surveillance by changing routines, moving operations to new locations, and using decoys to mislead them. But the Albanians adapted quickly. Every tactic Damon employed seemed to have already been anticipated. Convoys that were thought safe were intercepted. Safe houses assumed secure were raided. The gang began losing men, some kidnapped, some disappearing entirely. The silent hunt was as terrifying as any open battle. Each day the Liverpool Gang felt their power slipping further from their grasp. Fear had taken root, spreading like poison. Damon knew he could no longer act aggressively without risk. Every decision required caution, and yet hesitation could be fatal. The Albanians were patient predators, and Liverpool had become their hunting ground. The docks, the warehouses, and even the city streets were no longer safe for Damon and his men. Each moment of peace was temporary, each shadow potentially hiding a deadly adversary. And above it all, Arben Kodra's presence loomed like a ghost, orchestrating every move with precision, waiting for the perfect moment to deliver his next strike. Damon Cross had always believed loyalty was unbreakable among his closest men, but the Albanian Mafia had shown him how fragile trust could be. The gang's once solid foundation was cracking, and Damon sensed it before the truth was revealed. Small mistakes, forgotten shipments, and leaked information had begun surfacing in ways that couldn't be explained by chance. Paranoia spread through the Liverpool Gang, whispers of betrayal echoing in the dark corners of their hideouts. Damon tried to stay calm, reminding himself that fear was the Albanians' weapon, but the gnawing doubt in his gut refused to fade. It was Levi Marconi who first noticed inconsistencies that hinted at a mole within the gang. Instructions that had been carefully given were ignored, or worse, anticipated by the enemy. Safehouse locations were compromised, yet no one had physically been seen breaching them. Messages were intercepted before they could even be delivered. The Albanians seemed to know every move Damon planned, almost as if they had a spy in their midst. Every man in the gang became a suspect, and trust was replaced with suspicion. Even Troy Halstead, loyal for years, started questioning the decisions of his comrades. The revelation came like a dagger in the night. Damon discovered that Rico Maddox, the man he had trusted more than anyone, had been secretly feeding information to the Albanian Mafia. Rico had explained away previous lapses, covered for minor failures, and gained Damon's confidence. All along he had been reporting the gang's movements, strategies, and weaknesses to Arben Kodra. The betrayal was devastating, cutting deeper than any weapon. Damon's anger was matched only by his fear. Rico had given the Albanians every advantage they needed, and the Liverpool Gang was now vulnerable in ways they could never have imagined. With the truth revealed, Damon faced a dangerous dilemma. He could no longer rely on his inner circle, yet removing Rico without drawing attention risked further chaos. The gang's operations had to continue, and the Albanians were relentless. Damon tightened security, restricted communication to the smallest trusted group, and moved critical shipments to secret locations. Every plan became a delicate balancing act, every decision measured against the possibility of exposure. The tension was suffocating, and even the most experienced gang members felt the strain. The Albanians, aware of the internal chaos they had sown, intensified their attacks. Every strike now felt surgical, as if timed to exploit the gang's weakness. Docks burned, shipments vanished, and Damon's men were picked off one by one, sometimes without a single sound or trace. Fear became a constant companion, and the once feared Liverpool Gang was reduced to a shadow of its former power. Damon understood that the war was no longer just about territory, it was psychological. The Albanians had infiltrated his mind, making him doubt every ally, every plan, every step. Liverpool, a city that had always seemed under Damon's control, now felt like a trap. The streets were filled with eyes, both seen and unseen, and danger lurked in every shadow. Damon realized that to survive he needed more than brute strength. He needed cunning, patience, and the ability to outsmart an enemy who had already learned his every move. The betrayal of Rico Maddox was a turning point, a bitter reminder that in the world of crime, trust was a currency more valuable than money, and losing it could cost everything. The city of Liverpool had changed. The streets that were once alive with ordinary nightlife now ran red with fear and violence. The Albanian Mafia, under Arben Kodra, had turned the city into their hunting ground, and the Liverpool Gang was reeling under the weight of relentless attacks. Midnight ambushes became a norm. Men who once walked the docks with swagger were now shadows themselves, careful with every step, knowing a single miscalculation could mean death. The Albanians struck with precision, leaving behind bodies, burned cars, and shattered warehouses, ensuring that the terror was visible to all. Damon Cross watched helplessly as his empire crumbled around him. The docks, once a place of strength and control, had become a battleground. Every corner seemed like a trap. Convoys transporting contraband were intercepted and destroyed, leaving Damon with staggering losses. Troy Halstead, his second-in-command, had been ambushed while transporting a shipment of electronics. His body was discovered hours later, lifeless and surrounded by the signature red marks of Arben's men. The gang's morale collapsed as one trusted lieutenant after another was eliminated. Even the streets themselves seemed to whisper a warning. The Albanians were everywhere, untouchable and unstoppable. Every day brought a new act of terror. The Albanians had mastered the art of psychological warfare. Messages carved into walls, burned symbols in warehouses, and threats sent via anonymous channels ensured that fear penetrated every corner of the Liverpool Gang. Damon's men no longer slept easily. Safe houses, once considered secure, were violated, leaving no doubt that betrayal could come from within or from the unseen enemy outside. The Albanians had perfected the balance between violence and intimidation, ensuring that the gang's confidence was shattered before any direct confrontation. Civilians began noticing the chaos, whispering about masked men and sudden violence that seemed to appear without reason. Shopkeepers, taxi drivers, and dock workers watched nervously as the city's criminal war spilled into everyday life. The Albanians' presence became an unspoken reality. Their reach extended into neighborhoods, alleys, and even quiet side streets. Damon realized that the Liverpool Gang no longer had the advantage of local control. For the first time in his life, he was hunted. The city that had once bowed to his command was now a maze of danger, uncertainty, and constant threat. The escalation took a toll on Damon personally. He became obsessed with the next strike, the next ambush, yet every attempt to anticipate the Albanians' moves seemed futile. Each attack was faster, deadlier, more precise than the last. Ships that were meant to carry profits burned before they left the dock. Men who had survived earlier skirmishes disappeared without a trace. Fear spread like wildfire, leaving no space for courage or confidence. Even Levi Marconi, hardened by years in the gang, began to show cracks, haunted by the violence and the knowledge that escape was nearly impossible. Arben Kodra's influence was everywhere, though he remained unseen. Every action of the Liverpool Gang seemed predicted, every defense anticipated. Damon realized that brute strength alone would not save them. The Albanians had a strategy, a patience that made them unstoppable. The streets of Liverpool had become a canvas for their cruelty, each act of violence a stroke meant to break the spirit of Damon Cross and his men. The city itself bore witness to the ruthless power of a gang that operated without mercy, and the Liverpool Gang was slowly, inevitably being erased from every street they had once ruled. Damon Cross knew that waiting for the Albanians to strike again would be fatal. The Liverpool Gang had been decimated, their morale shattered, and their territory slipping through their fingers. He could no longer rely on fear to maintain control. He needed a plan, a counter-strike that could turn the tables, even if only slightly. Using hidden cameras, covert surveillance, and intelligence gathered from his few remaining loyal men, Damon traced the Albanians' network to a secluded mansion on the outskirts of Manchester. The place was heavily guarded, surrounded by high walls and security cameras, a fortress built to keep outsiders out. Damon's mind raced as he prepared his strike. Every decision had to be precise. He knew the Albanians were expecting retaliation, so he disguised his moves, sending decoys and false leads to confuse them. Trucks loaded with worthless cargo, fake shipment schedules, and staged meetings were all part of a strategy designed to mask the true target. Damon understood that even one misstep could result in death for him and his remaining men. Every ally had to be trustworthy, every route secure, and yet, paranoia lingered. The memory of Rico Maddox's betrayal made Damon question even those closest to him. The night of the counterstrike arrived. Damon's men moved silently, their vehicles gliding through foggy back roads, headlights off, hearts pounding. They reached the outskirts of the mansion undetected, observing from the shadows. What they saw was worse than expected. The Albanians had stockpiled weapons, armored vehicles, and caches of explosives, all ready for a citywide massacre that would have wiped out the Liverpool Gang entirely. Damon realized the scale of the threat. This was no longer a personal vendetta. It was an extermination plan. He signaled his men to strike with speed and precision. They breached the perimeter quietly, taking out guards who patrolled the outer walls. But the Albanians had anticipated a possible attack. As soon as Damon's team penetrated the mansion grounds, an ambush sprung from the shadows. Bullets tore through the air, and chaos erupted instantly. Smoke, fire, and screaming filled the night as the Albanians' traps activated with deadly efficiency. Damon narrowly avoided an explosion that engulfed part of the compound, realizing, with a jolt, that Arben Kodra had thought of every scenario. The Albanians had not only predicted a strike, they had prepared for it in advance. Damon and his remaining men fought with desperation, retreating through a maze of corridors and side exits. Several were injured, some captured, and others barely escaped with their lives. The counterstrike, intended to cripple the Albanians, instead became a brutal reminder of their cunning. Every attack the Liverpool Gang had planned was countered before it could even be executed. Damon's frustration burned as he realized that brute force alone could not defeat Arben Kodra. The Albanians' patience, intelligence, and ruthlessness had them always a step ahead. As dawn approached, Damon and the survivors regrouped in a hidden warehouse, shaken but alive. The counterstrike had failed in its goal, but it revealed one undeniable truth. The Albanian Mafia was not just powerful, they were unstoppable, methodical, and personal in their revenge. Damon understood that the coming days would demand more than violence. To survive, he needed strategy, cunning, and an understanding that in this war, the Albanians were always 2 moves ahead. Liverpool itself had become a trap, and the game of revenge was far from over. The war had reached its peak. Liverpool's streets were silent that night, the fog rolling in from the docks like a ghostly curtain. Damon Cross knew the Albanians would strike again, and he could feel it in the tension that gripped his remaining men. The city itself seemed to hold its breath, as if aware that something monumental was about to unfold. The Albanians had grown bold, confident in their control over the streets, while the Liverpool Gang was reduced to a handful of loyal fighters, haunted by loss and fear. Every alley, every shadow, felt like it could conceal death. Damon chose the docks for the final confrontation, a place that had once symbolized his power and control. The fog made it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead, providing cover but also amplifying the danger. He and his men moved cautiously, checking corners, scanning rooftops, and listening for the faintest sound. It wasn't just a battle for territory anymore. It was a battle for survival. Arben Kodra and his men had the advantage, having meticulously studied every movement of the Liverpool Gang in the previous weeks. But Damon was desperate, and desperation often led to bold, unexpected action. The Albanians arrived with terrifying precision. Men appeared from the fog as if emerging from the darkness itself, surrounding the docks in a silent, deadly circle. Armed and armored, they moved like a single organism, every step coordinated. Damon realized immediately that there would be no room for negotiation. Every escape route had been cut off. He signaled his men to hold their ground, but he knew the cost would be high. Gunfire erupted suddenly, shattering the quiet night and echoing across the water. The docks, once a symbol of commerce and control, were now a battlefield soaked in fear and blood. Bodies fell quickly, some friend, some foe, in the chaos of the firefight. Damon ducked behind crates, firing back at men who seemed almost superhuman in their coordination and speed. Levi Marconi took a hit, falling silently into the mist, his injury leaving Damon with a burning sense of guilt and urgency. Every corner Damon turned seemed to harbor another Albanian waiting to strike. It was a fight of survival, raw and relentless, with no room for hesitation. The Albanians' patience and strategy were on full display, their revenge not just physical but psychological, crushing the Liverpool Gang's spirit with every precise shot and brutal tactic. Finally, Damon found himself face to face with Arben Kodra in a narrow alley behind the main warehouse. Both men stared at each other, exhaustion and rage written on their faces. This was the moment that would decide the war. They circled cautiously, knowing one misstep could be fatal. Bullets flew around them, men shouted, and chaos raged, but in that small alley, the two leaders confronted each other directly. Neither gave ground, and neither broke. The fight was brutal, measured, and relentless, leaving dozens dead in the foggy night around them. When the gunfire finally ceased, the Albanians had claimed the docks. Damon and his remaining men retreated into the shadows, bloodied but alive, knowing the city was no longer theirs. The streets were littered with bodies, destroyed crates, and scorched vehicles, the aftermath of a war that had consumed everything in its path. Arben Kodra's influence over Liverpool was complete, and fear replaced respect in the hearts of anyone who had once followed Damon Cross. The final confrontation had ended the battle, but the scars of revenge and destruction would remain, a haunting reminder that in the criminal underworld, mercy was a myth, and survival came only to the ruthless and cunning. The city of Liverpool was forever changed. The streets that once pulsed with life now bore the scars of a war few would ever forget. Buildings were pockmarked with bullet holes, warehouses had been burned to the ground, and the docks, once the lifeblood of Damon Cross's empire, lay silent under the gray morning sky. The battle between the Liverpool Gang and the Albanian Mafia had ended, but its aftermath lingered like a shadow that refused to lift. Survivors moved quietly through the city, haunted by the violence they had witnessed and the friends they had lost. Damon Cross and the few remaining members of his gang had vanished into hiding, their presence in Liverpool reduced to whispered rumors. The Albanians, led by Arben Kodra, had secured their dominance, their reach extending far beyond the docks into the neighborhoods, back streets, and alleyways. Fear had replaced loyalty. The city's criminal underworld had learned a harsh lesson about the consequences of crossing the Albanians. Even minor gang disputes were now resolved with caution, as the specter of Arben's vengeance loomed over everyone. The surviving members of Damon's gang were fractured and broken. Some had fled the country, seeking refuge in distant cities, while others stayed in hiding, paranoid and constantly looking over their shoulders. Trust was a currency no longer available. Betrayal had shown its face, and Damon knew that survival depended not only on strength, but on cunning, patience, and the ability to remain unseen. Every decision carried risk, every movement had to be calculated. The Albanians had not just defeated the Liverpool Gang physically, they had dismantled their structure, leaving nothing but fear in their wake. Arben Kodra, however, did not celebrate. He understood that true power was quiet, a shadow that moves unseen. His revenge was complete, yet he knew that dominance required constant vigilance. The Albanians maintained control not through fear alone, but through precision and discipline. The docks returned to their normal functions, but the memory of gunfire, smoke, and blood lingered in the air, a constant reminder of the ruthless efficiency of their victory. Stories spread through Liverpool like wildfire. How a gang that once ruled the streets had been crushed, and how a foreign mafia had rewritten the rules of the city's underworld. Civilians, too, were affected. Business owners and dock workers lived in fear for months, wary of the slightest disturbance, conscious that violence could erupt at any time. Parents whispered warnings to their children, and the once bustling nightlife carried a silent tension. Liverpool had learned the harsh lesson that the underworld's conflicts were not contained to criminals alone. The ripple effect of vengeance touched everyone who walked its streets. In the end, the war left a legacy of blood. Damon Cross's empire was gone, replaced by Arben Kodra's strategic rule. The docks, warehouses, and streets of Liverpool had been tested by fire and survived as monuments to a brutal lesson: in the world of crime, power is fleeting, loyalty is fragile, and revenge, once unleashed, leaves scars that last far longer than the battle itself. The city slowly recovered, but the shadow of the Albanians remained, a ghostly presence that reminded everyone that the line between life and death in the criminal underworld was razor thin. The war was over, but its memory would never fade.